The first thing people always noticed about Walter Booker wasn't the lines on his face or the calluses that coated his palms. It was the way children clung to him as if he were a shelter from every storm. He was never a man of wealth or reputation. He didn't wear tailored suits or pull up in polished cars. He wore the same faded flannel, boots that carried years of dust, and a smile that could hide his exhaustion from the world, though never from the children who watched him closely. To the neighbors, he was a curiosity, almost a warning. "There goes the man with too many kids and too little money," they would mutter as he walked past, holding one small hand in his left, another in his right, and three more trailing behind. Some pitied him, others criticized him. They never understood why a man with so little would take in children with nothing. But Walter never lived for their approval. For him, love wasn't about what you had, it was about what you gave. For years, his livelihood came from a battered Toyota, the car that became his lifeline. Every night, while the children slept, Walter would drive through the dark streets, working long hours for Uber, his body aching, but his spirit refusing to quit. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was rent, groceries, school supplies, and doctor visits. It was the thin line between survival and collapse. Then, one evening, as the autumn sun bled into the horizon, the Toyota coughed its last breath. Smoke rose from the hood as Walter pulled to the side of the road, the dashboard lights flickering out. He sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel with both hands, listening to the silence that followed. The engine would never turn over again. His lifeline was gone. When he came home that night, his footsteps on the porch sounded heavier than usual. He tried to smile at the children waiting by the door, but the curve of his IPS faltered halfway. He told them nothing, but children know when the world has shifted. They saw it in the way he lingered at the kitchen table, staring at bills that seemed to grow taller each day. They saw it in the way he pushed his plate away, insisting he wasn't hungry, even though his stomach growled loud enough to fill the silence. Walter had always been the kind of man who gave without question. When shoes wore thin, he patched them with tape until he could save for another pair. When the children cried at night, he walked the floor with them in his arms, whispering stories about tomorrow being better. He never let them see how tired he was, how scared he was of failing them. But now, with his only source of income gone, the fear settled deep into his chest. On the porch steps, under the dim light of a flickering bulb, Walter pressed his calloused hands together. His head bowed as though the weight of his life had finally bent him. The children huddled in the doorway, whispering softly, their little faces peeking out into the night. Emily, the oldest, noticed how his shoulders slumped in a way they never had before. To her, he didn't look like the strong man who had carried them through every storm. He looked fragile, almost broken. The night was quiet except for the chorus of crickets, yet it felt unbearably loud with the unspoken truth. Their father, the man who had rescued them from loneliness and abandonment, was running out of strength. And though he didn't say it, the children could feel it. Something inside them knew that if they didn't find a way to help him, the man who had carried them all might finally fall. And that was the moment when the story began to shift, not with a miracle falling from the sky, but with a group of children deciding, in the stillness of that porch-lit night, that they could no longer just watch. They had to act. That night, after Walter finally rose from the porch and went inside, the children didn't sleep. They lay awake in their small rooms, staring at cracked ceilings and listening to the uneven hum of the house. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but something heavier pressed on their hearts. The image of their father sitting in silence, his head bowed, his strength slipping away. Emily, just 13, felt it most. She had always watched Walter with sharp eyes, reading the lines of worry he tried to hide. He had raised her since she was a toddler, scooping her out of a world that had abandoned her. To her, he wasn't just a dad. He was proof that love could be chosen, not forced by blood. And now, seeing him break under the weight of bills and a dead car, she knew she couldn't just stand by. When the house grew quiet and Walter's footsteps faded into the rhythm of sleep, Emily gathered her siblings in a whisper. Daniel, only 7, rubbed his eyes, confused but willing. Maria, 10, clutched her worn blanket, wide-eyed, waiting for her sister to speak. 2 younger ones shuffled closer, their faces pale in the dim glow of the hallway light. Emily spoke with a steadiness far beyond her years. Dad gave us everything when no one else wanted us. He skipped meals, worked nights, and never complained. If his car is gone, it's up to us to help him. We can't let him carry this alone. Her words hung in the air like a vow. Daniel, small but earnest, dug into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. He had been saving for candy from the corner store, a treat he'd been dreaming about for weeks. "I'll give this," he whispered, placing the coins on the floor. "I don't need candy if Dad needs us." Maria, eyes brimming with unshed tears, nodded. She had been saving for a birthday dress she had seen in a shop window, a dress she imagined twirling in. Slowly, she opened her fist, revealing a few crumpled bills. "He gave me a home," she said softly. "I can give up a dress." By one, the children added to the little pile, pennies from pockets, nickels from piggy banks, crumpled dollar bills folded tightly. The sound of coins hitting the floor was small, but to them it echoed like thunder. Emily looked at the growing stack, her heart aching and swelling at once. Finally, with trembling hands, she brought out her own treasure, a pink piggy bank she had been filling for over a year. She broke it open against the wooden floor, shards scattering as coins spilled out. Her siblings gasped at the pile, but she only smiled through the sting in her chest. "Dad gave us a family. This is how we thank him." When they counted it all, it wasn't much. $50, scraped together from dreams too small to matter compared to the weight of their father's burden. But to those children, it felt like a fortune. They huddled together, whispering in the dark, voices trembling with both fear and excitement. "We'll find something, even if it's old, even if it's broken. Dad can fix it." Emily's words were filled with determination, and for the first time in days, the younger ones smiled. In that fragile hour, as the wind rattled the windows and the world slept on, a quiet revolution began. A handful of children, once abandoned by the world, now bound themselves to a promise. They would save their father, just as he had once saved them. And somewhere down the hallway, Walter stirred in his sleep, unaware that the very children he had rescued were already planning the miracle that would change all their lives forever. The next morning broke with a pale, gray light filtering through thin curtains. Walter was already gone, off to search for work that didn't exist without a car. His boots had left small tracks of dust by the door, a silent reminder of his endless struggle. Inside the house, the children moved with unusual purpose. Emily clutched the envelope they had stuffed with their meager treasure. Coins, crumpled bills, every ounce of love disguised as money. She led them down the road, her siblings trailing like a little parade of determination. Daniel skipped to keep up, Maria clutched her hand, and the younger ones carried backpacks that jingled faintly with coins. They didn't really know what they were looking for, only that they had to find something their father could bring back to life. The salvage yard sat on the edge of town, a graveyard of rust and forgotten dreams. Rows of broken cars stretched into the distance, their windows shattered, their frames bent, their paint eaten away by time. The air smelled of oil and rain-soaked metal. For most people, it was a place of endings. For the children, it felt like the beginning. An older man with grease-stained hands and a suspicious gaze eyed them as they approached. "What are you kids doing here?" he barked. Emily straightened her shoulders, forcing her voice to sound older than it was. "We need a car, something cheap for our dad." The man's laugh was short, sharp, and not entirely kind. "With what, lunch money?" Her small hands trembled as she held out the envelope. $50. The man raised his eyebrows, his smirk fading into something closer to disbelief. He stared at the children. Shabby shoes, patched clothes, faces filled with a kind of desperate seriousness no child should carry. Something softened in his expression. "I might have just the thing," he muttered, motioning them to follow. He led them to the old, far corner of the lot, where weeds pushed through cracked pavement. There, half buried in rust and neglect, sat an old sedan. The paint had peeled into flakes, the tires sagged flat, and one of the mirrors dangled uselessly. It was ugly, broken, and forgotten. But to the children, it wasn't a ruin. It was hope. Emily stepped closer, brushing her hand against the rough metal. She could almost see her father hunched over the hood, tools in hand, determination in his eyes. She whispered, almost to herself, "He can fix it. He can fix anything." The man scratched his beard. "It won't run, might never run, but $50 and it's yours." The children didn't hesitate. They handed over their envelope, every coin and bill sliding from their fingers with the weight of sacrifice. The man scribbled something on a paper, then watched in silence as the children circled the car, their faces glowing with pride and fear all at once. That afternoon, when Walter trudged home, shoulders heavy from another fruitless day of searching, he froze in the driveway. There, sitting crooked and battered, was the rusted sedan. His children stood in front of it, grinning nervously, their little chests puffed with pride. For a moment he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his eyes stung, his breath caught. He walked toward it slowly, as though afraid the vision would vanish. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. "It's not much, Dad, but it's for you. We thought you could fix it." Walter placed his hand on the hood. The metal was cold, scarred with time, but beneath it he felt the warmth of something greater than steel. Tears welled in his eyes, and for once he didn't hide them. He turned to his children, his voice breaking. "You gave me more than a car. You gave me back my hope." And in that cracked driveway, surrounded by weeds and whispers from neighbors who shook their heads, at the sight of the junk heap, a miracle began, not in the roar of an engine, but in the fragile, unstoppable love of children who believed their father could do anything. The old sedan sat crooked in the driveway like a wounded soldier, its paint flaking under the late autumn sun, windows streaked with years of neglect. To passing neighbors, it looked like another piece of junk that Walter had no business dragging home. They shook their heads and muttered under their breath, "That man doesn't know when to quit." But to Walter, and more importantly to his children, it wasn't junk at all. It was a symbol. It was proof that even when life cornered him, his children still believed in him enough to place their little treasure in his hands. Walter didn't waste a day. The very next morning, with the sun barely brushing the horizon, he was out in the driveway, sleeves rolled up, a set of worn tools spread across the ground. The children crowded around, still in their pajamas, watching with wide, eager eyes. The clink of metal on metal echoed in the still air, mingling with the laughter of Daniel, who insisted on holding the flashlight, even though it was broad daylight. "Careful with that," Walter said gently as Maria tried to hand him a wrench that was too big. His voice carried patience, not frustration. Every small task became a lesson. He explained the names of the tools, what each part did, how an engine was like the heart of a body. The children leaned in, absorbing every word as if he were reciting magic spells. Evenings turned into rituals. After school and chores, they'd gather in the driveway, circling their father as he worked beneath the hood. Emily sketched drawings in an old notebook, adding little hearts around a crude outline of the car with "Our Future" scribbled above it. Daniel would sit cross-legged, whispering stories about the adventures they'd have once it was running again. Picnics at the park, trips to the lake, maybe even ice cream at a place they had only seen in commercials. The old sedan, broken and silent, somehow brought life back into their home. For the first time in weeks, Walter's laughter slipped through the cracks of worry. The children found joy not in the finished product, but in the act of building something together. They didn't notice the blister on Walter's hand, the nights he stayed up reading repair manuals by candlelight, or the way his back ached when he stood too long. They only saw their father coming alive again. But beneath the hopeful air, something strange began to stir. One night, as Walter shifted the driver's seat back to reach a bolt, he froze. A faint metallic clink echoed, sharper than loose change, hidden somewhere deep beneath the cushion. He shook the seat, but the sound disappeared. He frowned, muttering to himself, and went back to work. The children, too caught up in their excitement, didn't notice. Another evening, Maria sat inside the car pretending to steer while Walter worked under the hood. She pressed against the back seat and whispered, "Dad, this feels funny, like there's something under here." Walter brushed it off with a chuckle, assuming it was just springs poking through. Yet the feeling lingered, an odd weight in the car, as though it carried more than rust and dust. The house seemed quieter when he thought about it, his mind tugging at the mystery, but he said nothing. The children needed hope, not suspicion. Still, late at night, when the house settled into sleep and the car glistened faintly under the porch light, Walter often found himself staring at it longer than he meant to. There was something hidden inside that car, something waiting to be uncovered. He just didn't know yet if it was trouble or salvation. And in that driveway, with the sound of crickets filling the night, the stage was quietly being set for a discovery that would change everything. It was close to midnight when Walter found himself still crouched by the old sedan, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The children had long gone to bed, their soft voices fading into dreams, but Walter couldn't stop. Something about this car pulled him in deeper each night. It wasn't just about fixing it anymore. It was about proving to his children that broken things could live again, just like they had after being abandoned by the world. But that nagging sound, the metallic clink he had heard days before, wouldn't leave his mind. Tonight, he decided he had to know what it was. He slid into the driver's seat, pushing it back as far as it would go. The worn cushion groaned under his weight, and again, there it was. A dull thud beneath him, as though the car carried a secret. Walter frowned, ran his hand down the side of the seat, and then wedged his fingers into the small gap between the cushion and the frame. Something hard scraped against his knuckles. His pulse quickened. Carefully he tugged. At first, it didn't budge. Whatever it was had been hidden there for years, maybe decades. He pulled harder, sweat beading on his forehead, until at last a small bundle slid free. It was wrapped in dirty cloth, stained with oil and time, tied tightly with a strip of leather. Walter stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the night seemed to hold its breath too. Then, a whisper broke the silence. "Dad?" He turned sharply. Emily stood at the edge of the porch, her thin frame wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide with sleep and curiosity. Behind her, Daniel peeked out, rubbing his eyes. Walter hesitated, then beckoned them closer. "Come here. I found something." The children gathered around, their small faces lit by the porch light, their breaths puffing in the night air. Walter's hands trembled as he untied the leather strap and peeled back the cloth. The moment the last layer fell away, a golden gleam burst into view. The children gasped, eyes widening, mouths falling open. Resting in Walter's palms was a heavy, solid bar of gold. Its surface caught the light, glowing against the darkness like something out of a dream. Daniel whispered the only word he could find. "Treasure." Walter's heart pounded. For a moment he thought his eyes deceived him. He turned the bar over, running his thumb across the cool surface, feeling the unmistakable weight of something priceless. Gold. Real gold. Emily covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Dad, what does this mean?" Walter didn't answer. His mind was racing. Where had it come from? Who had hidden it here? Was it stolen? Was it dangerous? His chest tightened with both fear and awe. The car that his children had bought with their tiny savings had carried more than rust and broken springs. It had carried a secret that could change their lives forever. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft chorus of crickets and the distant barking of a dog. Walter looked down at the gleaming bar in his hands, then at the hopeful faces of his children. He saw the hunger they had endured, the nights they had gone without, the faith they had given him when he had nothing left. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Maybe this is our miracle." The children huddled closer, eyes locked on the gold as if afraid it might vanish. In that quiet, fragile night, their lives tilted on an invisible axis. The broken car was no longer just a symbol of faith. It had become the doorway to something far greater and far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. And though Walter's hands shook as he wrapped the gold back in the cloth, one thought kept echoing in his mind. Miracles always came with a price. Walter didn't sleep that night. The gold bar sat wrapped in its oil-stained cloth on the kitchen table, glowing faintly under the weak light bulb above. He sat across from it, his head in his hands, staring as though it were alive. His mind was a battlefield, one half whispering, "Sell it, fix everything, change their lives forever," while the other half hissed, "What if it's stolen? What if someone comes looking? What if this miracle is a curse?" When the first rays of morning slipped through the thin curtains, Emily padded softly into the kitchen. She climbed onto a chair beside him, her blanket trailing across the floor. She looked at her father's tired face and then at the wrapped bundle. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. Walter shook his head, his voice rough. "How could I?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, small fingers brushing his arm. "Whatever it is, Dad, we trust you." Those words cut through his storm of doubt like sunlight breaking through clouds. He nodded slowly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Then I have to be careful, for all of you." By midday, Walter walked into town, the bundle heavy in his jacket pocket. Every step felt dangerous, as if the whole world could see through his clothes, as if eyes followed him down the street. He went to a small, cluttered pawn shop run by an old friend, someone he trusted not to gossip. The man weighed the bar carefully, his eyebrows climbing higher with each second. He tested it, scratched it, tapped it against the counter. Finally, he looked up, his voice hushed. "Walter, this is real. Pure gold. I've never seen anything like it come through here. You know what this is worth?" Walter swallowed hard, his throat dry. He didn't ask the number. He didn't need to. He already knew it was more than anything he had ever dreamed of holding. On the walk home, he kept a hand pressed again. His pocket the entire time, his heart hammering. By the time he stepped back into the house, the children swarmed him with questions, their little faces glowing with curiosity. He held up a hand. "It's gold, real gold, enough to change everything." Cheers and gasps filled the room. Daniel spun in circles, shouting, "We're rich!" Maria covered her mouth, eyes shining with tears. But Walter raised his voice gently over the noise. "Listen to me. This doesn't mean we stop working. It doesn't mean we waste it. This means we have to be smarter than ever. Do you understand?" The children nodded, though the younger ones barely grasped the weight of his words. In the weeks that followed, Walter didn't sell it all. He took small pieces to his friend at the pawn shop, just enough to fix what mattered. The roof stopped leaking. The children had shoes that fit. The cupboards no longer stood empty. For the first time in years, the weight of hunger and fear lifted from their shoulders. But Walter refused to quit working. He took odd jobs, fixed fences, hauled lumber, anything to keep his hands busy and his children grounded. At night, he gathered them around the dinner table and said, "Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy family. Remember that. Remember what you gave up to bring that car home. That sacrifice is worth more than gold." Emily listened carefully, her eyes burning with pride. Maria tucked the words deep inside her heart. Even Daniel, restless and fidgeting, carried the lesson in the way only a child can. Half understanding, half dreaming. And yet, behind Walter's steady voice, doubt still lingered. He kept the bundle hidden in a locked box beneath the floorboards, his chest tightening each time he heard a knock at the door or saw a stranger's shadow stretch across the street. He knew what he held was powerful, powerful enough to save, powerful enough to destroy. Late one night, as the children slept peacefully upstairs, Walter sat alone by the window, staring at the old sedan in the driveway. The car that was supposed to be nothing but rust and broken springs had given them more than hope. It had given them a secret so heavy it pressed against his chest with every breath. And though he thanked God for the miracle, a question haunted him still. Why us? Why this car? And how long before someone came looking? Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, and in Walter Booker's street, whispers carried quicker than the wind. It began with harmless murmurs, the kind neighbors exchange over fences. Someone noticed that the roof of Walter's house had been fixed. Someone else saw his children wearing new shoes that actually fit. Then came the groceries, bags full of food carried in with laughter instead of quiet shame. At first, people thought Walter had landed steady work. Maybe the man finally caught a break, they said, half hopeful, half skeptical. But when the changes kept piling up, the repaired front porch, the new second-hand coats for the children, even the faint smell of meat cooking in a home that used to smell only of beans and bread, the whispers grew sharper. He's hiding something. No way that man suddenly came into money without a reason. Bet it's not legal. Walter heard the murmurs every time he walked into town. Some neighbors stopped greeting him. Others looked him up and down, their eyes full of suspicion. Even the man at the salvage yard raised a brow when Walter returned one afternoon, asking questions about the sedan's history. The yard owner rubbed his chin, his voice rough. "That car came from an impound auction, been sitting for years. No papers, no real record. Why?" Walter shook his head, forcing a smile. "Just curious." But inside, unease gnawed at him. If there was gold hidden in the car, someone must have put it there. And if someone put it there, they might come back for it. At night, he locked the doors twice, sometimes 3 times, his ears straining at every creak of the old house. He moved the gold again, burying most of it under the loose floorboard in the attic, hiding the key in a coffee tin no one touched. He never told the children where. The less they knew, the safer they were. Still, children noticed things. One evening, as Walter patched a tear in Daniel's new jacket, Emily sat quietly across the table, studying him. Her eyes were older than her years, sharp and knowing. "You're scared," she said softly. Walter froze, the needle hovering above the fabric. He looked at his daughter, his little girl who had once been too small to speak, now reading his soul like an open book. He sighed, setting the jacket aside. "It's not the gold that scares me, Emily. It's what people do when they want what isn't theirs." Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Then we'll protect each other, just like always." Her words eased the tightness in his chest, but not the weight on his shoulders. He forced a smile, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "That's why I'm the luckiest man alive." The following week, the whispers turned into knocks. First, a neighbor at the door, casually asking where Walter found the money for repairs. Then, a stranger who claimed to be interested in the old sedan parked in his driveway. Walter's gut twisted. He closed the door with polite firmness, but his instincts screamed louder with each passing day. At night, as the children slept, he stood guard by the window, eyes fixed on the driveway where the sedan sat like a sentinel, hiding its secret. He prayed no one would dig deeper. He prayed the miracle wouldn't turn into a curse. But somewhere, in the shadows beyond that quiet street, someone had already begun asking questions about a missing stash that had never been recovered. And Walter knew, sooner or later, the knock at his door would not be polite. The first real sign of danger came on a Thursday night. Walter had just finished reading to Daniel and Maria, their eyes drooping as the old storybook fell shut. He tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and headed downstairs. The house was still, wrapped in the hum of crickets outside. Then, a sound broke the quiet. a faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Walter froze. Through the thin curtain, he saw the silhouette of a man standing near the sedan in the driveway. The figure circled slowly, running a hand along the rusted roof as though searching for something. Walter's stomach knotted. He slipped out the back door, moving silently across the yard until he was close enough to call out, his voice firm but low. "Can I help you?" The man flinched, then straightened. He was tall, wearing a cap pulled low over his brow. "Nice car," he said, his tone too casual. "Been looking for one just like it. Heard it came from the impound." Walter narrowed his eyes. "It's not for sale." The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Shame. Cars like that sometimes come with extras." The words hit Walter like a cold wind. Before he could respond, the man tipped his cap and walked away, disappearing into the night. Walter didn't sleep. He sat by the window with a baseball bat across his lap, watching the driveway until dawn. The next morning, the children noticed his red eyes and drawn face. Emily asked what was wrong, but he only said, "Lock the doors, stay close." Days passed, but Walter's unease only grew. He caught sight of the same man again, once across the street, pretending to read a newspaper, another time lingering near the corner store when Walter walked in. The whispers in town had turned into something darker. People knew, or at least they suspected. One evening, as the children huddled around the dinner table, Walter finally spoke the truth. He set down his fork, his voice heavy. "Kids, I need you to understand something. That gold we found, it's not just ours. Someone hid it there, someone dangerous. If they think we have it..." He trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. Silence fell over the table. Maria's eyes widened with fear. Daniel clutched his spoon tightly, and Emily, steady as always, leaned forward. "Then we protect it. We protect you." Walter shook his head, pride and dread warring inside him. "No, I protect you. That's my job." But Emily's words stayed with him long after the children had gone to bed. He realized then that the gold wasn't the true treasure at all. It was the fierce, unshakable loyalty in his children's hearts. Still, reality pressed in. The gold had lifted them out of hunger, out of fear of the next bill, but now it threatened to bring danger straight to their doorstep. Walter knew he couldn't keep both the gold and his peace. A choice was coming. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the old sedan glowed faintly under the moonlight, Walter stood in the doorway, torn between miracle and menace. He whispered into the dark, "Lord, show me what to do." Because deep down, he knew, the strangers weren't just curious, they were closing in, and when they came, they wouldn't ask politely.